Excellent, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Board of Finance public budget hearing on Tuesday or for Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021 to order. At this point, I'd like to go over the agenda and a few talking points. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2021-22 budget. There are two items on our agenda this evening. Public hearing, as I just mentioned, on the budgets for 21-22. And this will include presentations of the town budget and the Board of Education budget. And there will be public forum after these presentations, where the public will have the opportunity to address the Board of Finance and comment on the proposed budgets. As we are in a virtual meeting setting this year, which is new for us, is for all of you. You may have noticed that everyone has been placed on mute to limit unintended noise distractions at this time. When presentations are completed and speaking opportunities arise, we will individually unmute those who wish to ask questions or comment, but ask that members of the public, should they want to speak, use the raise hand function to identify themselves. Hopefully we've used Zoom enough that everyone knows where the raise hand function is. We will go into that a little bit more shortly on how that will work in terms of asking questions or comment. Before we begin the presentations, I want to make a couple of opening remarks and overview of tonight's format and the proceedings. First, as I've always done, and I think my predecessors always done, I want to thank both boards, the Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, department heads, commission members, town school administrators and staff, and virtually hundreds of volunteers who have worked on these budgets since the fall. Many are actually on in the meeting tonight. If in attendance tonight virtually or watching at home at a later time, I want to thank you for tuning in, as this hearing is focused on all of you to assist in educating and informing the Guilford community and taxpayers what is contained in these budgets, how your money is being spent, and how these budgets will affect all of our bottom lines. For several months, as many of you have heard before, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education have been developing these budgets. In addition, as you will most likely hear several times, the Board of Finance has been part of several meetings and workshops with both boards since November. The presentations we are about to hear were presented to the Board of Finance at our last meeting. It's a regular meeting on February 18th, and we are very aware of the content of these budgets. However, we will have a chance during our Thursday night budget workshop meeting to drill down into the details of these budgets as needed before moving a budget forward to the Guilford voters at referendum, which I'd like to add on behalf of all of the Board of Finance members and everybody on this call that are elected officials. We all, as town leaders, have every intention of doing this year, sending a budget to referendum for voters, as opposed to last year when the pandemic forced the Board of Finance to solely vote on a budget. As difficult as that was for many of us to accept last year, it should be noted that the resulting tax increase that we are currently in this current fiscal year was 0.87%, which was the lowest mill rate increase in 20 years. As will be heard over the next two nights, we are again approaching another possible tax increase of around 1%. So those are my opening comments to kind of get things started. That being said, our format is going to be, for tonight, will be as follows. We'll have a presentation of the proposed Board of Education fiscal year 2021-22 budget by Superintendent Dr. Paul Freeman and Board of Education Chairwoman Dr. Katie Bell-Stracy. Upon completion of the presentation, we will allow the public in attendance to ask questions by raising a virtual hand, as I had mentioned before. When unmuted, we would like you to state your name, your address, and be as clear and concise on your question as possible. We have done this in the past when we were in person. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it here, but we would like to try to limit the amount of comments or questions. I would actually ask that they be questions. Try to group them together if possible and save comments for public forum. If there are minimal public questions, the Board of Finance members may ask questions, but it should be noted to all my colleagues on the Board of Finance that we do have a workshop on Thursday, and there will be ample time for us to ask questions at that time during that night in the meeting. After the Board of Education presents, we will follow the same format for the town. We'll have a presentation of the proposed town budget, fiscal year 2021-22, and revenue projections by First Selectman Matt Hoey. Upon completion of the town presentation, we'll follow the same format I've already just reviewed. After both presentations have been made and the Q&A period is complete, I will recap the night and set the stage for our workshop deliberations on Thursday evening. Finally, we will end the night with public forum, and anyone wishing to address the Board of Finance must state their name, address, and limit comments to no more than 3 minutes. Hopefully, that has set the stage for our Board of Education to begin the proceedings and the presentations. At this point, I would hand the floor over to Dr. Balistraci and to Dr. Freeman for their presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ailes. Tonight, we will be presenting the Board of Education's proposed 2021-2022 budget. And I thank the Board of Finance and all of the community who is here tonight. The administration's proposed budget was presented to the Board of Education by Dr. Freeman on January 11th. At that time, Dr. Freeman's budget represented an increase of 1.49% over the present year's education budget. This was the lowest proportional increase that this administration has brought to the Board of Education in at least 10 years. Since that presentation on January 11th, the Board of Ed has met with the Guilford Public Schools district leadership team, which includes all principals as well as directors of various programs within the district. We've met with the Board of Finance and of course had numerous conversations with Dr. Freeman, Dr. Crystal, and Mr. Bowden. We've heard from the public via email, phone calls, and 2 public forums that the Board of Education held on January 25th and January 26th. As the board deliberated the budget and the input received through meetings and public communication, we had 3 high-level considerations. Number 1, maintaining high-quality instruction and student learning. 2, continued attention to health and wellness of our students. And 3, fiscal responsibility. Our decisions were made in the context of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on our students, our staff, and our community, and in the context of a declining student enrollment in our district, a smaller reduction in student population than is felt in neighboring districts, but nonetheless a reduction to which we must respond. After many weeks of careful consideration and deliberation, the Board of Education met on February 8th and passed the proposed budget, which Dr. Freeman will present to you tonight. The Board of Education assessed that the budget presented to us by Dr. Freeman was indeed very carefully crafted and was very fiscally responsible. We made some adjustments to individual budget lines after careful assessment, and yet still bring to you, the Board of Finance, a proposed Board of Education budget that remains at a 1.49% increase over the present year's budget. I'm now going to ask Dr. Freeman to present that budget to you.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci. Mr. Ailes, may I share my screen?
Yes, either Tracy or I think just need, maybe you need to ask, because I'm looking to see if I can share the screen with you.
Yeah, I'm being told that the host disabled screen sharing.
Says you're the host now.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Ailes.
That was all Tracy, that wasn't me.
Thank you, Tracy. So again, thank you, Dr. Balistraci. Thank you, Mr. Ailes, members of the Board of Finance, and members of the community who are here tonight. It is nice to see so many people in attendance at this meeting. What I would like to do is walk you through, and without reading a number of these first slides to you, I do want to note that every year as we begin our budget build, we go back to our foundational documents. Each year as we go through the exercise of building our budget, we remind ourselves that we are building this budget on what has now developed to be a long-standing mission and vision for our school systems here in Guilford. Additionally, we build this budget on top of annual priorities. Each year, the Board of Education adopts priorities for the school year ahead of us. These three priorities have remained substantially the same over the last 10 years. The three main priorities that we work on in the school district are: first, to be sure that our schools are physically and emotionally safe and healthy places. Second, we ensure that we are building a professional learning environment. We take pride in the fact that we have one of the most professional and most talented teaching staffs anywhere in the state of Connecticut here in Guilford. And we intentionally work on that adult learning, the professional adult learning that is foundational to what we do. And finally, we really work towards the idea that all students will engage in academically rigorous tasks in every class experience. We build an academic environment that is aligned to standards, that is integrated to the principles of learning, that is measured by ongoing collections of evidence. This is the foundation of what we do. Guilford Public Schools is doggedly committed to instruction, and this continues to be the foundation of everything that we do in Guilford schools. Additionally, each year we identify individual initiatives, specific areas underneath the umbrellas of the mission and the vision and the priorities on which we're working in that specific year. This year, the most unusual year in which we have ever found ourselves, there were only three priorities. First was to be sure that we maintained a healthy environment for all of our students and adults who were in our schools in person. Second was to really support and develop the blended learning environment. So to go back to that priority about rigorous experiences in every class, this year we needed to make sure that we were doing that in this blended environment where students were balancing in-person instruction with virtual distance learning. Again, we did that by looking at our principles of learning, high leverage practices, and formative assessment. Again, this is foundational to what we do. And additionally, this year, the Board of Education wanted to ensure that the pandemic did not allow us to forget or set aside the work that we had done, that we had begun to further develop a culture and instructional practices that fostered both social justice and a more equitable environment in our schools. Additionally, every year when we begin building the budget, we remind ourselves about how we build a budget. We do not simply approach this exercise as asking for more. When we look at each dollar that we bring into our budget, we start by recognizing that every dollar must go towards providing a safe and healthy school environment. And that's been in place long before this pandemic, but certainly this year that takes on exaggerated importance. Again, maintaining our focus on that foundation. Every dollar that we spend has to leverage the instruction that takes place in our buildings for learning. We need to make sure that every dollar we spend moves toward improving and extending opportunities for all. We have no intention to stand still. We have no interest in standing still in Guilford. And finally, we pride ourselves on being innovative and utilizing human resources and all other resources creatively before simply asking for more resources on top of what we already request. And finally, every year the budget is built upon enrollment projections. We only budget for the students that we expect to see in front of us. This year, we are projecting a declining enrollment of 111 students as we graduate out a 12th grade, and we expect to bring in a smaller kindergarten class based on our previous experience over the last several years. I have repeatedly noted in all of my public presentations to date that we expect this number to drop. It drops every year from this presentation till actual opening of the doors in September, but we're also exceptionally cautious this year as we expect that we will have somewhat of a rebound next year. We saw increases in students who availed themselves of homeschooling or private school this year as a result of the pandemic. We also expect that there may be a rebound in kindergarten classes coming in next year. So we are cautious about that 111 number that we put out here tonight. Visually, what enrollment looks like is this. The blue line represents our actual enrollment back to the school year 14-15. The red line illustrates our projected enrollment. Some years ago, we had commissioned a demographic study, and that study projected that we would have declined by more than 20% in this time frame. We've actually declined almost 13% across that time frame. I also want to thank Mr. Hartman for pointing out a gap that we have had in this chart. This time, for the first time ever, we've added a green line to the bottom, which shows our teacher FTEs, our teacher full-time equivalents. You'll note that over the same time period, the teacher numbers in the district have decreased by 4.5%. I want to take a little bit of time to put those numbers in context. With roughly 3,000 students in the district, a 1% decline in the student population would be 30 students. With roughly 300 teachers in the district, a 1% decline would be 3 students. I think it's obvious that you would not expect the teacher staffing to decline in exact parallel to the student decline. You wouldn't expect that a decline of 10 students spread across 13 grade levels and 7 buildings would result in an immediate decrease of 1 teaching position. To put this in further context, the state of Connecticut collects similar data. Now, theirs have not been updated since, I believe it was the 16-17 school year. But in the 16-17 school year, over the past 6 years, Connecticut enrollment, student enrollment statewide had declined 8%, while the suburban districts similar to Guilford are declining at the rates we show here. Urban districts are actually growing in the state. So with a statewide declining student enrollment of 8%, the teacher workforce statewide had actually increased by approximately 1%. So with a similar projection, we are showing decreasing teacher numbers in our district in response to that declining enrollment. So with all of that being said, working from our foundational documents, taking that enrollment into consideration, this budget that we bring forward to you tonight, approved by the Board of Education and seeking your approval, stands at $62,445,900. That's an increase year over year of $917,441, or as Dr. Balistraci noted, an increase of 1.49% over the current year budget. To put that in historical context, Dr. Balistraci noted that this is the lowest budget that the leadership team has ever brought forward as a starting point for the Board of Education. You'll see here that it's not the lowest budget that was ever finally approved as we've gone through this process with the Board of Finance and the voters, but it is one of the lowest starting points that we have ever brought forward. We recognize in bringing this budget forward that we are balancing dual crises, both born out of this pandemic. We recognize that there is an educational crisis that we need to respond to, but we also recognize that the state and this community, like states and communities all over this country, are facing financial challenges as a result of this pandemic again. We worked very hard to balance those competing concerns in preparing this budget that we present tonight. Each year as we present the budget, we want to take a moment to talk about the efficiencies that we've recognized. Some of those creative reuses of resources I mentioned in those budget priorities. In this budget, we are planning on returning to pre-COVID staffing levels. I'm really excited to be able to stand here tonight and say that yesterday in Guilford, we stood up a clinic and we vaccinated 100 employees of the Guilford school systems yesterday. We believe that with the rollout of the vaccines that we are seeing, that we will be able next year to release a number of additional and unbudgeted positions that we brought in this year in order to create these safe school environments and return to those pre-COVID staffing levels. Additionally, and we will highlight this a little bit later in our presentation, we have looked at the placement of human resources, we've looked at schedules, and we have once again tried to be responsive to enrollment by being creative with where we place those resources. The medical benefits, which make up a significant part of this budget, are below the 14-15 levels. This Board of Education has renegotiated medical benefits with all 6 of our bargaining units. We have been able to move all of our groups into high deductible health plans that provide the same benefits for our employees, but at a lower cost to the community. We take great pride in what we've done with the medical benefit costs. And we owe an enormous debt to our principals and classroom teachers who are very thoughtful with material and supply costs at the school level. We have continued to adjust those dollar amounts in relationship to declining enrollments, but additionally, our professionals are simply frugal with how they use those materials. There's no other word to apply to it. That medical spending that I mentioned, this year, the medical benefits costs to the town is approximately $8.5 million. In school year 14-15, that stood at $9.6 million. It's gone as high as $10.2 million. As I said, we take great pride in what we've done with the medical line in our budget. When you look at the budget by location, you can see that budgets by school are flat or moving in the negative direction. Again, that is in response to declining enrollment, as well as just thoughtful management by the principals and careful usage by the teachers in the district. You do see some increases in the areas of special education, facilities, technology, which this year should be no surprise to anyone, and in the area of athletics. Of specific note that in that athletic area, there is some cost that is associated with the rebranding of our high school, as we have moved away from the Indian mascot and adopted the Grizzly mascot. And every year in the budget, we also take a moment to talk about the cost drivers, those essentially non-discretionary areas where the cost of doing business, the cost of meeting the needs of approximately 3,000 students simply becomes more expensive each year. Salaries are the single largest area of expense in our budget. We put our monies into the people who are in the buildings supporting our children every day. The teachers, the paraprofessionals, the clerical positions, the nurses, the lunch supports, the custodians, the principals. We are a people-intensive business, and even though we identify salaries as one of our greatest areas of efficiency, when one line item makes up 65% of your budget, and when those employees have contractual increases that we owe to them, then you will see a significant increase in that salary line year over year. I have to say, in 30 years of experience in education, I've never been in a year where teachers have worked harder. And I just think that every dollar in here has been earned this year. We have seen increases in transportation. We are in the middle of a 5-year contract with our transportation company, and the costs associated with moving those buses around the town every year increase contractually. We've seen increases in safety and sanitation contracts. We've seen an increase in the tuition that we pay for students who receive their education outside of district. We've seen increases in other contracted services, which are also contractors who are often contractors whom we bring into our schools to meet specific needs. And then there has been an increase related to the pension. These 6 areas combined create, again, essentially a non-discretionary increase of $933,000 to this budget. And as I noted earlier, the entire budget is only increasing by $917,000. It is not because of the discretionary areas of investment that this budget is increasing. It's because of these contractual cost drivers that the budget is increasing this year. We've taken some time to look at this over the past years. This is spending that is related to special education tuition, transportation, and those contracted services that I just mentioned. The red line shows our budgeted special education spending, and the red line shows our actual spending, and the blue line shows our budgeted spending in special education. This is simply the most volatile line that we have in our budget. It is difficult to predict year to year needs that students will experience over the course of a year. So while we do plan ahead for all of the students that we know will be requiring these services next year, it is difficult to anticipate what students will have emerging needs next year. I take great pride in the fact if you look at the actual spend, the red line, and if you look back to school year 15-16, you'll see that that actual spending is actually leveling out. It is, if you drew the best line from 15-16 to 21-22, that's almost flat, or at least on a very slow increase. Additionally, if you'll look back to school year 19-20, you'll see that with the flattening of the actual spend, we are beginning to bring our budgeting for special education into much closer alignment to that actual spend. If you look back to the trajectory that we were on in school year 10 and 11 through school year 12-13, we worked very hard to make sure that we were keeping more of our students in district, and that we were taking those dollars that were going out of district in the form of tuition and investing those into teaching positions and programs here in our school system. By keeping students at home and in district, we were able to reduce tuition costs, we were able to reduce transportation costs, and additionally, we're able to give our students a better experience. I don't think that we would have stayed on this trajectory, but if you simply take the line from 2010 to 2013 and project it out, it gives you a sense of the costs that we've been able to avoid by making those changes and by providing more of those services in-house. At the same time, I think providing a better service in the home school for the students who receive those supports. Additionally, every year, we do spend time to talk about the investments that we make in our schools. Even in this most unusual year, this is not a status quo year. Again, one of our budget assumptions was that we are always looking to move our district forward and to expand opportunities for all students in our district. This year, there are 4 fairly conservative, but I believe important and impactful investments that we will be making in the school system. We will be bringing on an additional school social worker at the high school level this year. This is a new contracted teaching position. We believe that we need to continue to provide supports for students in their social and emotional well-being in the area of mental health, and this is an important investment to continue supports in that area. I have spoken with the Board of Finance at some length about the residency program. This is a program that is now expanding statewide. It has received some significant coverage in the press recently. This is an opportunity across the state, and it is coming out of the regional educational service centers to increase the number of teachers of color in the state of Connecticut. In Connecticut, we suffer significantly from a shortage of teachers of color. This is an opportunity for individuals to work in the school system, receive a salary while they are at the same time attending certification programming in the evening. At the end of this school year, the individuals enrolled in the residency will have completed a year of work in the school system, completed their student teaching, and secured certification as an elementary school teacher. The monies that we show here are the amounts that we pay into this statewide program to cover those tuition and operational and administrative expenses associated with the program. This would afford 1 seat in that program. At the end of this year, we will have the opportunity to choose to hire that individual if we choose to do so. And if we do choose to hire the individual who has completed that residency here in Guilford, that individual will owe us 3 years of employment here in the Guilford Public Schools in return for this tuition offset. I've mentioned several times that we expect, excuse me, we expect this number to decrease. The regional educational service centers are applying for grants around this program, and there is a high likelihood that we will land federal grants that will offset these costs to the local school districts that are participating. Additionally, I've spent a great amount of time talking about the family equity liaison position that we are building into the district this year. This is a position that we anticipate will work approximately 10 hours a week. This is an individual who will be available to members of the community and their children who identify as members of marginalized populations or groups. Anybody who feels that their student is not having their needs met or is not being treated fairly because of their identification as a marginalized group will have the opportunity to reach out to this equity liaison. The liaison would have essentially 3 opportunities to support that family. First, through coaching and advising, helping that family to understand the routes that they have available to them to address any concerns within the system. Secondly, if necessary, by reaching out as a liaison to building administrators This person will not be interacting directly with classroom teachers, but with building administrators to help to mediate those concerns, and if necessary, actually advocating with and for the family with those building level administrators. As important as this reactionary component of the position, however, is that this person will be reporting to and meeting with me regularly, helping to identify patterns or flaws in the system that we can proactively address moving forward, again, to make sure that we are extending and providing opportunities to all of our students in our school system. And additionally, the Board of Education has heard from parents of swimmers and from swimmers themselves within the school system. Currently, we have a girls' home swim team. We have a boys' swim team that is part of a collaborative swimming with 3 other communities. These monies will go towards supporting the swim teams further, reducing the amount of parental contribution that is required. These additional monies, this is not all the money, but these monies will be added to those currently budgeted for the swim teams. This will cover all costs associated with head coaches, transportation, and officiating fees for both a home boys and girls swim team. It does not meet all the costs associated with pool time. There will continue to be an expectation of family contributions to offset the cost of pool time that is associated with those 2 teams. We've talked about efficiencies, we've talked about cost drivers, we've talked about investments. Every year I like to, for the Board of Finance and for the town, summarize what this means in relation to staffing. So what this means, again, is that you look at several positions within the system that we are looking to reduce because of that continued and projected enrollment decline that we've talked about. We will be reducing 1 math position. Let me be clear, that's in response to enrollment declines. That will in no way impact the math instruction that takes place, the sizes of math classrooms, the quality of the math instruction. But we know that we can allow 1 teacher at Adams Middle School specifically, we can allow 1 of those positions to be reduced. We're reducing half of a music position also at Adams Middle School. We will be reducing 2 classroom positions, again, in direct response to declining enrollment at the elementary levels. We will also be reducing 2 world language positions. We're not eliminating world language at the elementary level, but we will be reducing contact time in that area. Again, as we reduce in some areas, we then take those human resources and we repurpose them into other areas. Directly offsetting the reduction in elementary world language will be an increase in art contact time at the elementary, requiring the increase of 2 art positions. I've already mentioned the school social worker at the Guilford High School that we will be increasing. Additionally, we will be offering American Sign Language as a world language for credit at the high school next year. We will be bringing 2 part-time positions in the library media centers at both Cox and Leet from 80% positions to full 100% positions. And we will be adding district-wide a 2nd district-wide technology integration specialist position. This is a position essentially similar to the instructional coaches that we've spoken about so much over the past 10 years, but specifically targeting helping teachers to integrate technology into their instruction and into their classrooms. We've had 1 of those positions district-wide up until the beginning of this year. As we opened this year in the face of the pandemic, we added a 2nd position. It is immediately recognizable how important that position is, and we would like to hold on to that position moving forward. The technological demands aren't going to go away. To illustrate that a little bit further and to tie it back to the enrollment chart that I showed you back when I began talking, over these last several years, we have made reductions in the teaching force that have been directly related to enrollment. We have seen a reduction in the number of elementary classrooms. We've seen reductions in world language, physical education, music, math, and English language arts instructional positions at the middle level as we've seen those enrollment declines move through the middle levels. Again, I want to stop here. I cannot highlight enough that we have not allowed the quality of instruction in any of these areas to reduce. But with fewer students in front of us, we have been able to bring down the number of teaching positions. At the same time and over the same time frame, we have been investing those human resources into the expansion from a half-day kindergarten to a full-day kindergarten, into the district-wide expansion of special educational supports that I spoke about earlier that have allowed us to keep more of our students home, providing them with a better at-home program than they would have received elsewhere and controlling costs at the same time. We have expanded positions at both the middle and high school level around school psychologists and school social workers. We have continued to invest in that academic foundation, in that rigorous experience in every classroom, with the growth of a cohort of literacy and math instructional coaches over this same time frame. This has allowed us to invest in embedded professional development, where every teacher is learning to be a better teacher every day, right inside her own classroom, supported by instructional coaches who are themselves master teachers in both literacy and in numeracy, in math instruction. And again, with the creation of those 2 district-wide technology integration specialists. And please remember, as we've made the shift from the positions on the left to the positions on the right, the overall teacher cohort has been reduced by 4.5% over the time frame that we're talking about. So we have invested in expanding the program while we have been recognizing the declines in enrollment at the same time. And all of that being said, brings us to the conclusion of the operational budget. I do want to spend just a moment before handing it back to Dr. Balistraci to close. In addition to the operational budget that we will be moving forward, there will be a capital bonding request that comes forward from the school side as well. There are a number of items on this capital request, and it is a total bonding request of $6,259,773. I will note that all of these items have been discussed at some length at the Standing Building Committee, at the Board of Education's Operations Committee, as well as at regular meetings. But here tonight, I do want to point out a few important notes. The Guilford Lakes HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work that needs to be done at the Guilford Lakes Elementary School, was originally programmed to come forward last year. As Mr. Ailes noted at the beginning of the meeting, because of our inability to bring this to a full townwide referendum, this item was pulled last year and held. So while the entire bond request for this year sits at $6 million, it's important to note that we intended to ask for 3 of this last year, and this was delayed because of the pandemic. This is the original heating and ventilation system at Guilford Lakes. It is failing. We are putting significant monies into maintaining and keeping it running every winter and every summer when the air conditioning needs begin. It needs to be replaced, and this is an important item. The Guilford High School turf track replacement, this is the original turf field at the high school, what is often referred to as the stadium field. The carpet on that field is beyond its life expectancy. It's well beyond its life expectancy. We stretched a number of additional years out of it. The carpet itself, the artificial grass carpet itself, needs to be replaced. At the same time, we want to upgrade that entire facility by installing a shock pad, by engineering the field for a shock pad, which will make it safer, and by replacing the fill in the field. The turf, the track that surrounds the turf field is actually older than the turf and the carpet itself. It is cracking, it is peeling, it is failing, and that needs to be replaced as well. This is the second largest request at $2 million. We are carrying this in our school request, but I do want to note that in Guilford, we view the fields as a shared responsibility between the schools and between the town and the Park and Rec. We know that that field and that facility benefits all of our residents in Guilford, particularly our youngest residents in many ways, not just through their participation in school physical education or athletics, but from youth sports, Park and Rec activities, programs. And so we view this as a shared bond request that is coming out from the town and from the schools, although we're carrying it on the school side. At Cox Elementary School, there are boilers that are beyond their life expectancy and beginning to fail that need to be replaced. At Melissa Jones, we have an elevator we can't buy replacement parts for the elevator anymore. It is so far beyond its life. We need to be able to replace that elevator so that when it fails, we do not lose the ability to move students and to move community members from floor to floor, those individuals who need the assistance of the elevator. And finally, every year in the bonding request, we include monies for architectural and engineering fees so that as new needs come forward, we can work those up and have specific dollar amounts for you. So again, we recognize that this is a significant request. We remind the community that it ties together needs from last year as well as from this year and community components. And we believe that they are all necessary as we move this bond request in this operational budget forward. And with that, Dr. Balistraci, I will take a deep breath and turn it back to you.
Wonderful. This is our last slide, and I will simply close with what I think is a really important message. This budget represents a really important return on investment. We are seen across the state and recognize ourselves as one of the most successful school systems in the state by any measure. We have an international baccalaureate program. We were recognized, our high school, as a 2019 National Blue Ribbon High School. We have sports teams that regularly reach regional and state championships. We have musicals and the theater students who act in them who regularly receive awards. We have musicians that make it to regionals on a regular basis. We have numerous opportunities for our students to excel, and we have numerous opportunities to watch that happen. All of that happens with a budget and a per pupil spending that the Connecticut School and State Finance Project has identified as 74th in the state. So while we are sitting in the enviable position of having in our community one of the top school systems, we are 74th in spending. That amount at $18,565, again by the Connecticut School and State Finance Project, means that the majority of districts are spending more than we are, almost half. So again, I want to thank Dr. Freeman and his staff for bringing a responsible and conservative budget to us. I certainly want to thank them in this remarkable year for continuing to maintain the high quality of educational instruction that is so important to our community and certainly to this Board of Education. I want to thank Mrs. Trudeau and the business staff for the amount of time and effort it took to bring this budget together. And I want to thank the Board of Finance and the community for being present for this presentation this evening. The Board of Education submits this to you as our proposed budget for next year and hope that you will support the important aspects in this budget that will continue to support high quality learning, social emotional wellness, and reflect fiscal responsibility. Thank you.
Dr. Balistraci, Dr. Freeman, thank you very much for the presentation. Very thorough, as always. At this point, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I know a few people have joined us since. At this time, we will, as a board, because this is a public hearing, entertain any questions that the public may have. What we would like you to do, again, I'll reiterate, there's a raise hand tool. If you could raise your hand virtually, and we will unmute you, and you can ask the question of the of either Dr. Balistraci or Dr. Freeman. And at this point, I'm going to scan names and see if anybody raises their hand to ask a question. And so will Tracy, who's our secretary. as they do in auctions. Going once for questions for the Board of Education. Going twice. I do see a hand being raised. I will ask to unmute and please identify yourself, address, and question.
Hi, my name is Danielle Scarpolino. My address is 405 Andrew Lane. And my question is for Dr. Freeman. On the slide that showed the $25,000 cost for I believe it was called a family, I'm forgetting, equity. I'm not sure exactly what the title was, but I'd like to ask.
It was a family equity liaison.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. What exactly is that position? What exactly would that person, I'm assuming it's one person, and who would be considered marginalized in Guilford? Who would actually be the people that would benefit from that position?
So the position we are anticipating would work approximately 10 hours a week. This would need to be somebody who was both familiar with the working of a public educational system and somebody that could be empathetic and could listen well and could hear the needs of people who identified as members of any sort of marginalized group. That would be a self-identification. That could be somebody who identified, who felt that because of their religious identity, their gender, or their gender identity, because of their membership in a racial or ethnic group, that they felt that the needs of their children were not being met, or that they were being treated unfairly because of their identification as a member of any one of those groups. Those individuals would have the ability to reach out to this liaison. This liaison, when they come on, when they're hired, they will make themselves available to the community. They will have a school issued email box and voicemail box, and anybody who again feels that their child's needs are not being met because of the way that they identify, doesn't matter how you identify, but they feel that their needs are not being met specifically because of such an identity, they would have the ability to reach out to this person. That person would, again, as I mentioned earlier, coach, consult, advise the family, could also reach out to the school building level administrator to help be a mediator, and if necessary, could advocate with that school administrator as well. And again, this person would then report back to me on a regular basis, helping us to identify what might be patterns in our system or structural flaws in our system so that we could fill those areas.
Thank you, Danielle, for the question. Thank you, Dr. Freeman.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Anybody else question for the Board of Education? Okay. I will ask if the Board of Finance has any pressing questions that they would like to ask with remembering that we have a workshop on Thursday night. But if there's any pressing questions, Board of Finance.
So, Mike, I have at least a dozen or so questions. So I don't know if you want to get started tonight or.
Well, if you have a dozen questions, I have to be honest, I'd like to keep this to the public. If you, I'll tell you what, I'll allow you to. Just to keep things, no, seriously, just to keep things moving, and you can ask as many questions as you want. I just want to make sure the public has an opportunity to hear the town as well. But Jonathan, if you'd like to ask a couple questions, that's fine.
All right, why don't I follow up on Danielle's question, I think, and maybe ask a few more questions about the proposed equity officer.
Okay.
I was kind of curious, what will the equity officer do exactly as well? And another question that kind of came to mind was, how many complaints have we gotten historically for a social injustice issue or a marginalized student issue? Like, what kind of volume of complaints are we looking at?
So I will mention, Jonathan, that that this person would be available so that if somebody felt that their child's needs were not being met or their child was being treated unfairly, they would reach out to this individual who would be able to both advise and coach that family.
I mean, I heard that part, sure.
Okay, well, your first question was you wanted to follow up on what this individual would do. So again, that's what individual.
I'm sorry. The question is, how many documented complaints have we had?
So we don't I don't have a list of documented complaints in front of me, but one of the purposes for this position is that you need to remember that we want to provide an environment where people feel comfortable having these conversations. We do not want our administration to be viewed as unapproachable. And this is a way for us to create a position that is specifically set aside. We had toyed with calling this an ombudsperson. We had toyed with calling it a liaison, somebody to whom the community feels invited to raise concerns of this nature, rather than wondering where to go with concerns of this nature. If you look at school districts around the state, many school districts are putting in place what are being called equity officers. Those positions are full administrative positions. They are in the administrative bargaining contract, and those tend to run $150,000 a year. I know off the top of my head that South Windsor and Farmington have both added such positions recently. We felt that rather than adding a full administrative position at $150,000 price point, that bringing in this contracted liaison position at $25,000 would both be efficient and would be invitational to the community, so that those individuals felt that they were being invited to have those conversations at that level. Jonathan, I don't know exactly how many complaints that we've had off the top of my head, but I can tell you that we have dealt with issues of bullying, of intimidation, and even of blackface in this community. We know that those concerns are in our community, and counting the individual complaints may not be the best way of encouraging people who have those concerns to come forward.
Now, another
Mr.
question
Mills, may
I
I
would
just
have.
add? Oh, I'm sorry. This is Dr. Balstracy. May I just add one point to that, which is this. Several years ago, we started through Sandy Hook the Say Something app, which is an app that allows students and members of the school community to anonymously report troubling behavior. That is different than this equities officer, but I'm providing it as an example because when that app was first made available to our students, our administrators were at times overwhelmed with the amount of communications that came through that inbox or that app. I just want to underscore what Dr. Freeman is saying. When you provide an opportunity like this that has not existed before, you are then giving people an opportunity who have complaints that they may not have had a place to voice before to do so. Certainly, we will be able to know over a year or two how successful that officer is. It's not something we can predict well now, but previous experience with similar types of opportunities for communication about troubling issues would tell us that that we will learn pretty quickly how necessary and successful this kind of position will be for our community.
Mr. Trotta, I would like to, if I could, because the public comes first on this, before you ask any more questions, I do have Ms. Scarpolino's hand up.
Oh, great. Okay.
So I am going to lower,
I encourage you.
ask her to ask the question that she may have. Hold on one second. I lost the asked on mute. There we go. Go ahead.
There we go. Sorry about that. So my major concern is that $25,000. We have children, we have a group of high schoolers that are starting to form a group for mental health and wellness. And I know Dr. Freeman has repeatedly said that he's not going to let COVID interfere in his efforts to, I don't know exactly how he wants to phrase it, but create this equitable atmosphere in Guilford. Again, the question that was just raised by the gentleman, in comparison to how many children are suffering with mental health and how many children need this officer, I would think we do need to consider COVID very seriously this year and take that $25,000 and put it into our children's mental health that has greatly diminished over this last year, greatly diminished. I work with children from K through 12, and there is not one parent that doesn't walk through my door that doesn't tell me how much their children have suffered over this year. So I would like to know the numbers of how many people need this equity officer, how many people during this COVID time need that more than our children need mental health?
So I would
Thank you.
never suggest that this is needed more than mental health. I would suggest that this is integral to mental health. I think that it's important to all of our children's mental health. I would also suggest, and Mrs. Trudeau, maybe you could pull out the numbers, but we employ school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists across this district to suggest that 10 hours a week to talk about issues of equity and to talk about issues of identity, in addition to the investment that we make around the continuing investment that we make into mental health. I would never suggest that mental health is not, and again, when you look at the priorities that this school district set out this year, the first one talks about all of our schools being physically and emotionally safe settings for all of our children. We invest significantly into mental health. We invest significantly into special educational needs. We invest significantly into academic needs. And to suggest that 10 hours a week could be put towards these needs as well, I do not feel is a competition.
I will also add, Ms. Scarpellino, that we are in fact investing in increased mental health by adding a social work position in this proposed budget. So both of those things are happening as increases.
So,
Mrs. Trudeau, do you have a total FTE count for social workers, psychologists, and school counselors? May I ask the question, Mr. Ailes?
yes, you may. Linda, go ahead. I want to state, Linda, before you say anything, I see Ms. Scarpellino's hand up again, and I see another hand up. I have no problem as chair of the Board of Finance to entertain questions. I want to make sure that it's clear that if there's commentary, that it's done at public forum. I want to maintain the fact that this is not a debate. You certainly have every right to ask questions, but I don't want to get into a debate back and forth because we do have quite the agenda. So I just want to state that before we go into any other questions. But Linda, if you'd like to respond, and then I'd like Susan Weber. I will unmute you, and then Danielle, I'll have you ask another question if you so have one. Linda, go ahead.
Okay. We currently have 8 social workers with 1 proposed being added. We currently have 6 psychologists, and there are 10 FTEs for guidance staff.
Thank you, Mrs. Trudeau.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Weber, I've lowered your hand, I believe, and
okay, can you hear me?
yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Susan.
And address, name, address, and question, please.
This is Susan Weber at 73 Fair Street.
Thank you.
Just a comment on the equity position. We have 8 social workers, 6 psychologists, numerous counselors. We've got a student organization that's starting up for mental health. Given the budget and where we are as a community and rising taxes in the state, as a taxpayer listening to this, I do not feel that that position is justified at all. And you've already got another social worker already on the docket here as well. So that person should be able to fulfill that role. In addition, I'd like to understand Dr. Freeman's budget estimate for his critical race theory agenda that he's proposing with his new direction, hard history.
So I'm happy to answer that question. There is no critical race theory agenda in this district. Critical race theory does not exist in any of the curricula in the school system. There is no money budgeted in this budget for critical race theory of any kind.
Okay.
Hold on. So let me rephrase it. Social justice, my mistake.
That's still a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can clarify that. There are no specific dollars that are set aside for the Board of Education's initiative to continue to invest or to continue to work towards environments and instructional practices that foster equity and social justice. We don't have a specific dollar amount that is set aside for that. I can say that this year, teachers have engaged in professional development that has focused on culturally responsive instructional techniques. We have conducted curriculum reviews. Those incorporate instructional pedagogy with the idea of creating classrooms that are socially just. We have used the term social justice for some time now. There are no specific dollars in this budget that there's no line item for social justice. It doesn't tease out of our budget in any way.
Okay, so just the social equity is what the position is, maybe an item that would attend to that.
Yeah, thank you. So the only two items that you could call out would possibly be the residency program that we will participate in with other school districts statewide at a cost of $30,000. And again, this is working with other districts collaboratively to help grow a pipeline of teachers of color in the state of Connecticut. And secondly, the position, the contracted position that we've been talking about at some length now, the family equity liaison. So you could possibly identify $60,000 in this budget that would go towards the direction of social justice if you chose to, yes.
Great, thanks for finally getting there.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
I do see Elizabeth Wilson, who is asking a question. Ms. Scarpolino, I do see you. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance, so I want to lower Elizabeth's hand, and you can unmute and ask a question. Address, please, too.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Wilson, 27 Hazel Road. My question is around the mental health staffing for students. I know that there are free resources in the community that have specifically 2 12-step groups that have offered to set up and staff meetings during the school day at the high school, and they both have been rebuffed. And I know that these take place, for example, at Norwalk High School and Milford High School. So I'm wondering why we're spending money when there are free resources available. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm unprepared to answer that question this evening. I would need to touch base with folks at the high school to understand about what the offer was. What I will say is that I will say there are a number of resources available in this community for mental health, free and for purchase. I would not suggest that those meet the needs of our students and that we as a community and a school system don't need to continue to invest in the mental health of our students. It has been a focus of this board for some years now. As Mrs. Scarpolino said, this year more than ever, we need to be aware of and investing in the mental health of our students, their social emotional wellness, their mental health. This is not the year to back away from that. I applaud the community resources. We partner well with Guilford Youth and Family Services, with the town, and with a number of other providers, public and private, around this community. I think that there continues to be a lack of supports in that area. I don't believe that the school system can be alleviated of our responsibility to budget and provide for these needs because of the resources that exist in the community, despite how much we appreciate the resources that exist in the community.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Ms. Scarpolino, I will lower your hand. Your question, please.
Two brief questions. The first one is, I really would like a more definitive answer to my question. In comparison to the needs of the mental health of our children this year, I would really like to know the demand between the two, because $25,000 can go a long way to help our children that need the mental health attention. That's the first part of my, I guess it's not a question, it's a request. My second question is, when you mentioned that there is no dollar amount being spent towards equity, there's no line item. My question is, last year when we spent $6,000 on one book for social equity, it was called How to Be an Anti-Racist. Where would that fall? Under what category? Because $6,000 is a lot of money for one book. That's a line item.
It's not a line item. So there are no line items in this budget. We do not separate monies out for social justice. We don't necessarily don't isolate monies for trauma-informed instructional training. We do have monies that are set aside for professional development, and we have monies that are set aside for professional texts. I mentioned earlier that this year teachers engaged in a variety of trainings. Teachers engaged in training today, rather this year, not today. Teachers engaged in training around trauma-informed instruction. Teachers engaged in training around culturally responsive and sustaining instructional techniques. Teachers engaged in training around Zoom and technology. Teachers at the elementary level engaged heavily in training this year that was targeted towards phonics instruction. None of those dollars are separated out at this budget level by those topics. Those dollars fall into the areas of professional learning, professional development, and professional texts. The book that I bought, How to Be an Anti-Racist, it was purchased for every teacher in the district. That was bought out of a professional text line. The trainings that I mentioned around things like phonics or technology or culturally responsive and sustaining instructional techniques or trauma-informed instruction, those monies came out of the professional development line.
Thank you. There's another question. Ms. Weber, your question.
Yeah, thank you. Susan Weber, 73 Fair Street. So if there's a line item for professional development, how do we as a town know what you're doing there? It seems not very transparent. And when you say you're not engaging in critical race theory, there are many parents that beg to differ. There's only a couple of us that are speaking tonight, but we need more transparency around that.
So I really appreciate that question. I invite the community to visit our website to look at the publications that we put up fairly regularly. I invite the community to attend our Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Board of Education committee meetings that happen spread across the school year. I invite the community to attend our Board of Education meetings and read the minutes that are posted in association with all of those Board of Education meetings. All of our curricula are presented in the community. They are approved by the Board of Education in public. All of our curricula are available to the community before that approval. All of our textbooks are presented in public, and all of our textbooks stay available to the public to view before they are approved by the Board of Education in public. Everything that we do is done publicly. The Board of Education in their operations meetings every month review in public every expenditure in the school district over the past month. So this Board of Education strives for transparency, and I invite the community to avail yourself of all of those opportunities.
So How to Be an Anti-Racist was given public approval before you purchased that for $6,000?
No, that's not what I said. We do not get pre-approval from the Board of Education for every expenditure, but every expenditure is reviewed in public. Every purchase order that is paid and every check that is cut is reviewed by this Board of Education in public. And at the operations meeting, Mr. Sands asked every month if there are any questions on any of the expenditures that happen from month to month. I also will note that on the topics of equity and social justice, I have written quite extensively and shared those communications with the Board of Education, with the community. If you visit our website and go to the archived Our Direction newsletters, you will find 4 or 5 in the last 2 or 3 years on this topic, talking about the work that we are doing.
This is Dr. Balstracy, if I may, just to add, a Board of Ed member also individually every month reviews finances with Mrs. Trudeau. So not only do we review them in the operations committee every month, but individually, we each take a role every month in reviewing them specifically.
Thank you. I want to be clear that I understand that there's a topic here that is of concern. Seeing that I understand that there's questions, this is a Board of Finance meeting. These sounds like some of the issues that really should be coming up in front of the Board of Education. I respect the questions, but we do need to move on. Ms. Scarpolino, if you have another question, that is fine. But at this point, I'm going to have to, this will be the last question so we can move on for the evening.
So my last question or statement is, you say that you're transparent and you are open. I've had meetings canceled and they've not been able to be rescheduled. So it is inaccurate to say that you're transparent with the public. We did not know you were purchasing $6,000 worth of one book. So I don't know how you want to word things, but to say
Ms.
you're being
Scarpolino, I'm sorry,
Yes.
is this a question or is this a comment?
It's both. The question
I'd like to hear
is
your
how,
question.
so the question is, will Dr. Freeman have another sit-down meeting with me so we can discuss this further?
Mrs. Scarpolino, this is Dr. Balistraci. These issues have been addressed with you by myself and by Dr. Freeman offline. This is not an appropriate time for this question. And I ask you to refer back to the email communications that you have received from me.
Thank you.
You know, I got to raise my hand here and say that this is an appropriate time to talk about how we're spending taxpayer dollars.
Jonathan, I think that, there are issues with the Board of Education and there's responses. This is, we're going into commentary, quite honestly. We don't get into the nuts and bolts of the Board of Education budget. Yes, it is an expenditure. But we don't have, as a Board of Finance, we do not have the role to tell the Board of Education how to spend their money. This is why every single time we have a monthly meeting, we accept the report of expenditures and we approve the town. I've said that numerous times. So this is a Board of Education issue that they need to address. I understand it's in the budget, but we are not going to start debating and having comments about Board of Education pedagogy. Jonathan.
No, I agree that we don't make decisions line by line on how the Board of Education spends their money, but we do review them, we do express opinions about them, and we do have review and control over the total budget.
Yes, we do. Very good point. Okay, that being said, I do want to look to move on to the town. Jonathan, I know you had a number of questions, but I'm assuming you will hold them until our workshop on Thursday evening at this point?
At the chairman's discretion.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea so we can move on. Thank you.
Mr. Ailes, thank you for the time. And Mr. Trotta, I look forward to answering your questions Thursday evening.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so with that, we are going to move on with our presentations with the town fiscal year 2021-22 budget and revenue projections. First Selectman Matt Hoey, I believe your screen is being or will be shared shortly, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank everyone, particularly the community who has showed up to engage town leaders in terms of the budgets. It's nice to see it. We didn't have an awful lot of it last year because of COVID. These are certainly different times, and we will make it through them. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to present the town's fiscal year 2022 budget. Additionally, I would like to thank the members of the Board of Finance for your participation, your questions, and contributions during our capital and operating budget development sessions. You have informed our decisions, and this budget was approved unanimously after significant and great discussions, some challenges of each other's thinking, some concerns, but always consistent with the culture of collaboration the Board of Selectmen has established during the last 4 years. Particularly during the budget deliberation timeframe. I'd also like to thank my staff, many of whom are on this call tonight, particularly department heads, who have contributed to building this budget, and particularly the staff, Mary Jane, Karen, Mitch, and Tracy for helping prepare not only this presentation, but all of our budget documentation. Like Board of Education, we have a mission statement of sorts, and that really encompasses the these 6 bullets. And you can read the ones starting lower left and going around the top. Those groups really comprise 25 separate departments with distinct service delivery functions. And in effect, they're like 25 small businesses. And they're core functions of government service delivery. And if successfully managed, they lead to an exceptional quality of life for those who decide to live in Guilford. I want to cover a couple of the budget objectives and key factors. We, as always, try to maintain a high level of service in the face of increased demand and uncertain state funding. We'll talk a little bit about state funding later in this presentation. Continued investment in maintaining infrastructure and roads. We've realized that we need to respond appropriately to short and long-term impacts of COVID-19 while facing the demographic changes that have increased demand on our senior and social services. Additionally, in this budget, we're finally addressing resource deficiencies in information technology. We continue to protect the tax relief programs for veterans, elderly, and the disabled. We are funding the pension liabilities at actuarial recommended levels. And we can talk a little bit more about this later, but the budget you have in front of you reflects dropping our discount rate from 6.25% to 6% on the anticipated rate of return on our funds, which has a significant impact on this budget. As we've all talked about over the past years, we've continued to try to enhance capital project funding within the operating budget to be on a pay-as-you-go sort of basis. This budget reflects a pretty significant increase in terms of a percentage increase. And lastly, this budget includes no reliance on revenues from the unassigned fund balance.
Mr. First Selectman,
Yes, sir.
can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
I hate to interrupt you, but I don't seem to have a shared screen of yours. I don't know if it's just me or if it's everybody.
No, there's no.
And I apologize. I thought it was me. I'm looking and I don't see your slides. I just see a very large Brady bunch of all of our images. And
Mr. Chairman, I think the First Selectman was just summarizing the budget verbally.
I thought.
No, it's from the
No,
slide.
I thought I was sharing the screen, quite honestly.
I'm following last week's slides, but they're not up on the screen, Matt.
Ah, okay. Let me see. Let me challenge me here. Show taskbar, right? Okay.
Green arrow, share screen.
Yeah, except I don't have the green arrow on the shared screen. I don't have the functions on my screen right now. Hold on.
It's under your host, so.
Bear with me.
Okay.
Okay, so. Okay. Here we go.
There we go.
We have it now?
There we go. I think we all have it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize. You got through, a few of your slides there, but we can see now.
It's your discretion if you want me to go back just so people can see them, or are you okay with the way I've summarized them?
I think the summary is fine. If you want to get into, just maybe go back a couple of slides because it was more introductory. Maybe go back to just maybe budget objectives.
Okay.
Whatever makes sense to you.
All right. My challenge is going backwards here.
Just page down, that is the first one.
Yeah. I'm not getting the page down stuff. I'm only able to go forward, not backwards. My apologies.
You can't go backwards because that is the first slide.
Need to have
Yep.
all this on the board pack.
The presentation
Yeah,
only works when you're not actually giving the presentation. We all know that.
Okay, what I'm gonna try to do here.
Just pick up where you are, Matt. We're all right.
Are you sure?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
okay. Sure. We have it on the board pack.
Okay, but the public doesn't have it, and this is a public session, so.
Right,
Uh,
right. That was my concern. So,
Okay, I'm in slideshow mode and I'm trying to go from the beginning.
there you go.
Are you good?
Yep,
All right, these were the bullets,
Yes.
yep.
key objectives, key factors, budget
Yep.
objectives, key factors.
I
Are
think
we
that-
okay?
Yeah, I think that's where you want to start. Or
Thank you, and my apologies for the lack of technical proficiency. The budget that was approved, the original budget request that was presented to the Board of Finance 10 days ago, whatever it was, a week and a half ago, reflected a town operating budget of a 3.2% increase, an operating capital budget of 12.28, debt service a drop of 0.71 for an overall budget increase of $1,019,548 new dollars, which represented a 2.43% increase. As I mentioned a second ago, that was the original budget. I think you may recall that we had some discussions that both during the budget presentations and a week and a half ago, that there was an opportunity for the town to receive an extended amount of SAFER funding for our firefighters. That has been realized. There will be monies available for the balance of this fiscal year, which I believe is somewhere around 70,000 plus 110 to 120,000 for fiscal year 21-22. So you'll see that total town operating budget drop from 3.2% to 2.83, and the overall increase, the total budget increase, is now 2.17 versus the 2.43, which you were presented with earlier. Let's talk a little bit about some of the reductions that the Board of Selectmen made on the way to this point after the department submissions for their request. The Selectmen's revision resulted in a 278,000 from the departmental budgets. We cut over $1.3 million out of the capital request. Let's be honest, we probably didn't really cut 1.3. In many cases, we either determined that they'd be best facilitated by bonding, appropriate bonding, and or moved into subsequent years. Employee benefits were reduced by $9,400. Prior to those cuts, the the operating budget would have been a 2.47% increase. Some of the increases by major category, total salaries, as you can see, 3.64%. And even though we have a significant amount of money in reserve for personnel, because we have 4 union contracts that are being negotiated currently. One, we've included known step increases. 2, new positions that we are adding to this budget. 3, under total salaries, there was under employee benefits, retirement benefits went up. As I mentioned earlier, the assumption rate going from 6.25% to 6% in and of itself reflects a $220,000 increase in this budget and this line item. Additionally, the reserve for personnel is about $186,000 as we await the outcome of our negotiations with our unions. What I'd like to note is that all other operating budget expenses decreased by over $143,000. This budget includes additional personnel. And let me walk you through these. I think I went through it the last time. Jonathan, I sent you, and I believe everyone, some answers to the questions you had asked earlier. The new positions or the changes in positions under full-time. The finance department changed from a part-time bookkeeper to full-time is virtually a 0.5% body increase or personnel FTE increase. This has already taken place based on some revisions approved by the Board of Selectmen as it relates to town hall staffing. And this is closely linked with the second line item, which is legal, where we actually, when Pam Millman retired, we did not replace her. We shifted some of those responsibilities to the town council. But additionally, some of the purchasing agent functions that were handled by Pam Millman will now be picked up by the finance office. So that's sort of an offset. Under information technology, I mentioned earlier that we have for a long time not addressed the significant deficiencies we have relative to personnel in information technology. We have a single IT resource that handles all of the town departments with the exception of police and fire, which is a highly specialized IT discipline. And as you may recall, when we brought on that individual, we had anticipated or probably more hoped that there would be additional bandwidth from that position to support the balance of the town IT operations. That support ratio of one individual to some over 125 individuals just doesn't cut it any longer. So we're making that change at that position. Under Public Works, there's a new maintainer 2. The Public Works Commission has for 3 years in a row asked to get to the level that we would be at with this additional individual. I should note that the commission, after the budget had been submitted, came back to the Board of Selectmen and said that they would cut an additional $50,000 out of their budget if they could keep the position in place, and we have made that arrangement. The next two are largely COVID related. Social Services Program Coordinator. As you'll see, the demand for our social services is up by about 30% year over year, significantly related to COVID-19, the impacts of COVID-19 on our community, and particularly among those that are at highest risk during these times. It also reflects being honest about the jobs and description over there. We have an administrative assistant who has been acting as a program coordinator while trying to balance the responsibilities of an administrative assistant. We are adding a new program coordinator. There is a strong likelihood that the individual currently filling that administrative assistant role is a candidate for that role, and then we would backfill the administrative assistant role. At Youth and Family Services, this is not really a new position. It's a new budgetary position because we've had this resource funded by grant funds for a number of years. This is a school-based clinician for Adams Middle School, and this is in direct relations to the impact that we've seen from COVID. Caseloads are up by 50% at the Adams Middle School. So this would be a full-time position at Adams Middle School to deal with some of those needs. You heard earlier that there's an additional social worker going in at the high school. We already have a school-based clinician from Youth and Family Services that works alongside the Board of Education staff. On a part-time, so the net effect of those positions on a full-time basis is 3.5 new positions. In terms of part-time in the health department, we are already have brought on a part-time sanitarian. That decision was made last fall in recognition of the fact that we weren't keeping up with our inspections because of the COVID-19 responsibilities that have been heaped on the health department. I will say without a doubt, and I know that a lot of people in this town work hard for you as town employees. Our health director, Sonia Marino, is working 7/24 and probably 10 to 12 hours each one of those days. The workload on that is absolutely unbelievable. So there have been we have identified some deficiencies. That position alone is not enough, as you'll see, because under contracted services, we are going to bring in an environmental health technician, which will pick up a significant number of the responsibilities that Sonia Marino is not able to get to. Additionally, there is another impact to the strain on the health department, and that's as it relates to issuing building permits. One of the responsibilities of the health department is to review building permits in order to ensure that the health conditions, the health requirements are satisfied. So in total, we should be able to respond more effectively to the varied roles of the health department. Lastly, in the building department, 2 contracted part-time assistant building officials, and they are also already on board because the demand has been there. I think you were all presented at the Board of Selectmen budget workshops with some data about the increased number of building inspections required. That increase went into effect in 2018. So those 2 officials are already on board, and we intend to keep them there through the near term, through next budget cycle, while we evaluate the efficacy of collapsing the part-time building officials into a full-time role. The net effect to the budget for those positions, $186,197. All right, quickly, I'll try to run through some of these items. These are the major increases in the operating side budget, although we still remember that we had an overall decrease in the operating side. Information systems, obviously that's a new position. In the insurance line item, pretty significant increase, but that is for 2 new types of insurance: cybersecurity and active assailant shooters coverage. I can't believe we're talking about having to have insurance for an active assailant, but communities throughout the state and the country are now engaging in this type of coverage. Under the building department, contracted inspector, public works, obviously a new position, police department, step increases, increased training and testing requirements based on recently passed legislation. The fire department is largely replacement salaries. Employment benefits, I think we've covered between retirement, increases in pension costs, overall retirement costs, and the reserve for personnel. And under capital, we've almost gotten back to the 2018 levels, which for all of you, those of you who have been doing this alongside with me for a number of years, you know we've continued to try to get on more of a pay-as-you-go basis with capital. There were some reductions in the operating budget, obviously, and they're detailed here. These are the significant ones. And I've just got a couple. Legal is that this is as a result of the change that we talked about earlier in personnel. We did not backfill the in-house counsel / purchasing individual, but we did increase to some degree the outside counsel. But there's a net savings of $95,000 in the legal account this year. The other 2 worth note is town properties, and that's largely related to the fire hydrant rentals. The rates for those have come down. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the water company made a deal with the Public Utility Regulatory Authority in order to have their merger with San Jose Water Company approved. But nonetheless, we're a beneficiary. And debt service has decreased by $74,000. In the capital budget, I'll briefly cover a couple of these. Engineering, that's the sidewalk account. At the fire department, that's some vehicles, that's defibrillator equipment and hazmat equipment. Park and recreation, a drainage project associated with a field renovation up at Baldwin School. There are replacing outdated mowers and tractors, as well as a new pickup. At the police department, $187,000 of that is related to vehicles. The balance is our 5-year contractual taser replacement program. In public works, we're looking for some pickup trucks, or smaller pickup trucks, mobile lift, which can a mobile truck lift, which will be able to be relocated if we are to move our public works facility eventually. Those are a couple of the major items under public works. All right, this is what I was referring to as we've talked about for a long time. The pay-as-you-go model on capital is something we've always ascribed to. Unfortunately, budgetary pressures occasionally make it easy to go to the capital line item, and we did that in both 2019 and 2020. Appreciate this board's consideration last year to increase it, and hope you will see your way to doing the same this year. The revenue side of the budget. Let me talk to a couple of highlights. I think the most significant piece of information, which will be detailed on the next slide, is significant grand list growth. That's in large measure responsible for what will eventually become a nominal tax increase, despite some larger spending increases. What I want to point out is, at this point, the state has not the state, but the state revenues are anticipated to be flat funded, consistent with last year, as was represented in Governor Lamont's biennial budget presented a couple of weeks ago. That's the good news. The only challenge is the legislature has to approve the same thing. The word that I'm getting is that the legislature will most likely be keeping municipalities whole, particularly during this time of COVID, where they know that we are all facing significant challenges. This, by the way, this budget, when combined with the Board of Ed, as we talked about earlier, and I think the chairman mentioned it, projects out at a 1.1% tax increase, despite the fact that those negative numbers you see on the right-hand column add up to about $785,000 worth of revenue that we had last year that is not there this year. And some of that, I think, is discretionary, particularly as it relates to the use of fund balance, but the others are hard, fast numbers that we're comfortable with. I mentioned the grand list growth, 1.42%. This is the highest number that we've experienced in many, many years. I think it's reflective of some very successful projects that have gone on in town. We are anticipating some continued growth in the grand list based on what is currently in the hopper in terms of permits and projects that are currently being reviewed by our Town Hall South land use organizations. Everybody's favorite topic for a number of years has been debt service. When is it finally going to level off? Well, we finally gotten to that point. But here's how it breaks out, the three components: the high school, the school, and the town. And as you can see, we finally hit the plateau. And I know this is a slide that Chairman Ailes was very fond of years ago when he was working to get the high school project passed, and he was very honest and very clear, as were we all. We would feel some pain for a number of years, and we have, but that is now behind us in terms of increases to our debt services. All right, let me just recap briefly. Board of Selectmen reduced the budgets by almost $280,000. Same thing on capital budgets. Departmental operating expenses without salaries decreased by 2.35%. The increase in salaries is 3.64, including reserve for funding for contracts expiring June 30th, 2020, and the new positions that I detailed earlier. We've also increased capital funding levels to Board of Selectmen goals in recognition of debt service increases. At the end What else? Okay, state funding estimates, as I indicated, are based on previous years, prior years. This is an ask. We put this out every year, not every year, but the last few years. We continue to be committed to the unfunded liability and the other post-employment benefits, and we are very close to having the trust documents ready to go and roll out. Through your good graces, we have allocated $1.2 million to the OPEB fund over the last couple of years, and would respectfully consider that, given the size of the surplus in the health account, that you would consider doing an additional contribution this year. As I said earlier, town services are really 25 separate departments with distinct service delivery functions. And I just want to highlight for you, what are you getting for your tax dollars with these 25? I'm not going to talk about all 25 departments, believe me, but what are we getting for those tax dollars? Where does the money go? Fire department. Calls were up over the previous year, and response times continue to go down, and that's a direct result of the installation of the fire station in North Guilford. And we had a lot of discussion about equity in the previous presentation. This is all about equity as well for half of our community, or not half, but a good portion of our community should expect to have decent response times to emergency services. A police department. This is an interesting mix this year. Actual calls are down. I think that has to do with COVID. However, our patrol checks continue to go up based on input from our community. Guilford Free Library. I'm very proud of what the library has done. One of the few libraries in the state that has stayed open. We closed for a short amount of time, but we were one of the first to reopen, and we reopened in a way that many others have still not done. Additionally, library staff continues to provide technology support to seniors through the pandemic. In addition, they have worked with our Park and Rec folks in registering our senior citizens for vaccines. Park and Recreation. They have pivoted from an organization that hosted untold number of programs and so forth to becoming a social service agency in addition to all the other things that they do. I just want to highlight just a couple of the things. They just got a statewide award for their ability to pivot and change their delivery model. The Spotlight Award is a statewide award, and it's largely around what they've done for seniors. They also have managed the CARE program, which provides grocery and essential goods shopping to 190 homebound seniors. 2,200 shopping trips since well, that really didn't get going until April. They consistently provide drive-through lunch pickups on a weekly basis for up to 150 seniors. And Meals on Wheels met the demand for double the number of meal requests due to the pandemic. And those meals are all prepared out of the community center. Engineering, just a couple of high points here. The MS4 and industrial stormwater permit, solid waste and recycling reporting, those are all new mandates over the past couple of years. And by the way, they are unfunded mandates. And as far as the list goes, those major infrastructure projects are in various stages of completion. Youth and Family Services, we talked a little bit about that, but this is an interesting number. Their traditional caseload for the current year is 90. A normal caseload is somewhere between 50 and 60. So this is directly related to COVID-19. I spoke to a parent today who was very concerned about the emotional, social health of one of their children, and in fact had just engaged Youth and Family Services because of the concerns about depression around the fact that their social interaction in the schools has been significantly limited, particularly when quarantines hit, when kids have to stay home for the 10 days because of the quarantine requirements when contact tracing determines that it's essential. Health Department, I talked a little bit about. Public Works. For anyone who was driving on the roads in the last couple of snowstorms, you know the kind of work they're doing. And we got that done despite the fact that the coronavirus hit our Public Works Department rather heavily over the past 2.5 weeks. I won't read every one of these, but the number was interesting. 4,500 deeds recorded on land records. That's 18 a day, just on deed recording that they process over the course of 240-day work year. Social services, this is the number I was telling you about. That's a 30% increase in mid-year call counts and service requests. The assessor, 20 tax assistance programs. In effect, this is what we do. We serve our residents, and that's how we serve our residents. Most people, not everyone's aware of all of the things we do. I thank you for the time for me to explain some of those, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, First Selectman Hoey and the Board of Selectmen and everyone else involved in the town, departments, commissions that were involved in these. I know it was a challenging effort, so to speak, in getting to this number based on the initial requests, I should say. So at this point, I would open up to the public who are on our in our meeting. If you recall, raise hand would be the tool you would use, and Tracy and I will monitor. If anybody has any questions for the First Selectman or the Board of Selectmen. I do see a hand, Elizabeth Wilson. Just again, for the record, name, address, and your question.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wilson, 27 Hazel Road. The unfunded liability, the 36 million, what percent is that of the total amount of, I forget what it's called, the post-retirement liability?
The 36 is our total liability. Is Mary, you want to unmute Mary Jane, Mike?
So does that mean nothing? So we have nothing right now set aside?
Right now we have $1.2 million there. We have been handling other post-employment benefits as part of our operating budget. A couple of years ago, this board and the Board of Finance made a decision to establish a trust, much the same way we have the same as we do for our pension obligations, and with the intent to eventually move the benefits payments for those out of the operating budget into the OPEB trust. Quite honestly, we're several years away from that. We've been funding that as we go, as surpluses have resulted predominantly in our healthcare account.
Mary Jane, did you want to add something to that?
I'll just say that we, as Matt mentioned, with the medical account, we do pay our OPEB costs directly out of the medical fund now. When we budget for medical, that includes current employees and retirees. We are hoping to minimize that long-term liability by opening the new trust that both the town and the board will participate in. And once that happens, that does actually minimize our liability because we now have a long-term solution to cover those costs. So once that trust is open, one of the goals would be to have that liability reduced.
Mary Jane, could you just provide an estimate, just an estimated round number as far as how much we do pay out of medical for OPEB yearly?
Roughly $800,000 to $900,000.
Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
just sorry, just to cut in, for the sake of clarity, it might be good to point out that this is other post-employment benefits and that the town's defined benefit pension plans are very well funded.
Correct. These are medical costs that
Yeah.
we pay after retirement, not pension costs.
Right.
The goal of the trust would be to be managed in the same way or a similar way as the pension trust, but it does pay for different benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions for the first selectman?
Are you taking some questions from the board, Mr. Chairman?
I will do so similarly to how I addressed it before with the Board of Education. I do not see any other hands up. So Jonathan, if you'd like to ask a question or two, please do.
All right, I'll try and stay on topic here because I'm pretty interested in the OPEB funding and was asking some questions about it prior to this meeting. I'm curious, I tried to do a little bit back of the envelope calculations. If we were to finance a trust to cover our current costs of about $800,000, $900,000 at our current assumption rate, I kind of guesstimated that would be around $15 million fund that we would need. I was using the 6% assumption rate. Is that our objective, to accumulate $15 million so that the proceeds of the trust of the fund can cover our costs?
Yes, it is.
So I realize that can be an excellent kind of long-term decision to fund OPEB benefits that way. But, when you kind of look at the burden on the taxpayer for sort of pay as you go and build up the fund, it starts to be a pretty heavy burden on the taxpayer, almost $1 million to, as an example, over the last year, about $1 million to contribute to the trust, and then another almost $1 million to actually pay the costs. And, I'm wondering, how well we've thought that out and if pay as you go is any kind of reasonable option. And then I guess one more follow-up question, if we have an answer.
You want me to answer that one first?
Yeah, but let me just tag this one along. Do we expect those OPEB benefits to go down? Will as many retirees be eligible for the medical fund as there are today?
Mitch, take the second question and I'll address the first one.
Okay.
Jonathan, Mitch Goldblatt, the Director of Human Resources, for those that are not familiar with me. I can probably handle a little bit of both of those, though, and I'm sure the first selectman will add in also. But Jonathan, your suggestion about how to handle the OPEB fund year to year would suggest we should handle the pension fund the same way, which is not a wise practice. And you can see how towns and cities have gotten into trouble trying to pay pension funds year to year. The OPEB fund is something that was brought up by GASB several years ago. We have put it on the books. We've been trying to get ourselves in a position to make it similar to the pension so we don't get into the situation of where we don't have the funding. By putting money into the fund, we're not asking for $36 million in one shot. We've got to start funding that. As far as your other question, I'm sorry, Jonathan, repeat the second part of that.
I was just curious if there's going to be more or less retired employees who are eligible for the medical.
There's going to be more. And the reason basically is because most of our OPEB costs go to police department. There are other people who are receiving post-retirement benefits as well. But when you think about the police officers who are able to retire in 20, 25 years, and then their lifespan is hopefully even more than that, you'll see that number is going to continue to increase as people do retire and do receive their post-retirement benefits. Not dissimilar from almost every other town in the state. So it's something we have to do to be able to compete. It's something we have to do to be able to keep up with how to fund this, because paying it year to year, yes, we can afford $800,000 this year, but 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now, we won't be able to keep up unless we start putting it into a fund. Matt?
Yeah, I think the question here is, this is a long-term play, a long-term investment play, so that we do not find ourselves in the same kind of position that many municipalities are with their pension, where they did not fund them and the balloon payments start to come down the road. So what in effect we're doing, yes, there may be some additional burden on today's taxpayers, but eventually this will benefit the community at large because we will have investment money to pay down those OPEB costs as opposed to just straight tax dollars.
So, another kind of question and another line of thinking on that is, I remember Ken had brought up at some point on one of the Board of Finance meetings that, we chose to finance the high school for, I believe, 20 years instead of 30. And we sort of put a heavier burden on this generation of taxpayers. So, what's some kind of fair amount or number of years that we would spread out across the tax base to build up this, this OPEB account? What our taxpayers are already, a little heavily burdened for the school. What might have been spread out over 30 years has been spread out over 20. Should obviously, like Mitch has pointed out, we're not going to fund the OPEB fund in 1 year. What's a fair amount of years to finance this kind of fund? Is it 20 years or 30 years?
Jonathan's Mitch again. I think it'll be, Jonathan, I think it'll be funded in the similar way that the pension is funded, whereby we'll have an actuarial study done, and the actuaries will recommend each year how much we should be funding it to keep it solvent and keep it whole and ready and willing and able to be able to pay our retirees the same way our pension is done. This is something we have to build up over time. But like I say, we can no longer kick the can down the road as all you have to do is look at other towns and how much trouble they're in because of kicking the can down the road on their pension. We are going to avoid making that mistake with our OPEB. It's a wise decision and one that generations from now will be thanking you for doing.
But Jonathan, I
would
like
agree
to,
with that long-term
Jonathan,
comment, by the way. Go ahead, Matt, I'm sorry.
Jonathan, I'd like to address the issue of the 20 versus 30 years. There were original projections for 30 years. However, the fact that by going to 20 years, I can't remember what the number is, perhaps Mary Jane or it has a number. What we save over the anticipated cost by going to 20 years with a significantly lower interest rate than we had originally projected. So yes, that was a decision, but it was a financial decision that we would save this community somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million, I think was the number. I can't remember. Mary Jane?
Closer to 15.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. The 20-year financing, saved the town, as a whole, a great amount of money, and it's a nice long-term decision. But it did sort of, I think Ken made a good point. It did condense the payments on this sort of 20-year of taxpayers for this generation to pay for the school. And that's my point about OPEB is that the long-term decision to fund it makes sense. But then, just as a taxpayer last year, for example, I feel like, hey, I got taxed for twice as much the cost of the OPEB costs because, we had to pay them and we had to start trying to, make a dent in building up a fund to so that we have a better long-term solution. So it's, it's just
Jonathan, you make good points, but
right.
Good Lord willing, and the both of us are still alive 20 years from now, and people will say, why didn't you fund that OPEB thing? It's costing us a fortune now.
Mary Jane, I did see your hand go up. Go ahead.
Well, as most of you know, I can speak for hours on this topic, but I won't. I just like to mention, Mr. Chairman, that the OPEB has no bearing on the budget this year. We do not have additional costs in the 22 budget. It is just an item that we bring to your attention for future budgets. I'm happy to talk about OPEB ad nauseum at many more meetings because I have it at a lot of your meetings, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to do so tonight.
But in all fairness, the taxpayer was burdened with the cost because we basically took it out of the medical that we've been, requesting for our budget from the taxpayer, and we used it to finance OPEB. We took $1 million. We could have gave it back to taxpayers, but we put it into the OPEB fund.
No, yeah, but we reinvested it so this community as a whole would be better off over the long term, Jonathan, not
Okay,
the short
but I
term.
mean, the taxpayer incurs the cost if we finance this fund.
I'll
Just
just
like
add that,
anything else.
I'll just add that both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance requested that I move forward with the OPEB trust. So, we've had many of these conversations already. That money is currently sitting in our fund balance. It is not in a trust at this point. It would still need to be moved. So there are decisions yet to be made. But again, we're not asking for anything extra in this particular budget request.
Okay, I mean, an account by any other name is still a Rose, right? I mean, we moved it out of the medical account into an account that's earmarked for the OPEB, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Anything, I do want to go back to the public. I haven't seen anything on the public raising hands. Again, Board of Finance members, we will have plenty of time on Thursday to ask questions of our first selectman and the board. And Mary Jane and Mitch and anybody else who we would like to ask.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
We did not cover the 5-year capital improvement plan that was revised yesterday by the Board of Selectmen. Would you want me to cover that now or just submit the 5-year capital plan document to you folks tomorrow for your review and discussion on Thursday? Because the 5-year capital plan has now identified the specific bonding request, the projects for bonding. As you're aware, the Board of Selectmen traditionally goes out every 2 years for bonding, and we have a significant number. We have some projects that we hope you will consider for bonding. It's slightly under $5 million. I could, at the sake of keeping people here too long, I could detail them or just forward them along to you tomorrow.
What I was going to say, is there a way you could summarize for the public and send the detail on for Thursday so we have some time to look at it?
Sure.
But I do want to remind the public and everybody on the meeting that the town did not request bonding last year. So this is on the 2-year cycle.
Right. All right,
Can I
Mike,
make
quickly.
a small request too, Mr. Selectman, First Selectman?
Jonathan, go ahead, ask your question, go ahead.
When we receive that update on the capital improvement plan, usually in the descriptions, especially for vehicles, you usually note how old the vehicles are. And I'm wondering if you guys could continue to do that or do that in the document you give us tomorrow.
Yeah, we can see if we can update that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Matt, do you?
I think most of those were documented in the materials you got during the budget presentations, but we'll go back and see if we can amend.
Okay, I may have missed it, but I've gotten a little bit spoiled with just seeing it right in the description column.
Yeah.
From year to year, most of the time.
Mr. First Selectman, if you could categorize. I'm sure you probably have them in categories. If you could just generally summarize in categories where the capital items are.
I do. Thank you.
Right.
I'll try to be brief, as challenging as that can be for me sometimes. In engineering, we have road projects. We have $500,000 in each of the next 2 years, which is consistent with what we've done in bonding for a while. We also have $300,000 for Lake Quanapog Dam. That is our responsibility, even though there's a state boat launch at the top of that lake. That is in disrepair, and we know we have some challenges there. We also have Chimney Corners Coastal Resilience, which we hope to receive some lot SIP funding for, which is the state special transportation funding to offset those costs. The anticipated cost for the road improvements, as I said, it's $500,000 each year. The Chimney Corners Resilience Project is $1 million. The Lake Quanapog Dam is $300,000. We have nearly $100,000 for a new slate roof for the library. At Public Works, we have 2 new trucks. And Jonathan, we'll make sure that we tell you which ones those are replacing, but those are 2 of them for $560,000. We also are, we have $400,000 for fuel tank removal and replacement at Public Works. Our underground tanks need to be replaced per DEEP. So that's those are the projects. And I wasn't as brief as I hoped to be.
That was actually pretty good. That was better than I expected. Okay. Ken, did I see your hand go up? Ken, go ahead.
It's a point of clarification when Jonathan was referring to Ken in favoring the other program, he was referring to Ken McKenzie, not the current Ken, the former Ken, who was on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gaberman. I should have clarified that.
Yes, you should have. Anyway, I was for the movement to the 20 years.
I'm sure Mr. Gamerman also brought it up at some point, but it was Mr. McKenzie who brought it up more recently. So,
I do think the 20-year financing, was a wise decision, but I'm just pointing out that it has an impact on the current taxpayer. That's a bit heavier than it might have been if we went for the traditional financing.
Short term, yes, it was, without a doubt. Okay. As I'm looking at a lot of faces here, before we move on to public forum, I'm going to try to do something, and that's recap what we just heard, and I'll try to be quick with one sip of water. So what we've heard tonight in a recap on budgets, the town operating budget being requested is $31,300,694, which is an increase dollar-wise of $862,697. That is a 2.83% increase. On town capital budget, the request is I shouldn't do it that way, $1,102,177. That is a $120,567 increase, which is 12.28%. The total debt service request, $10,420,988. That is a $74,197 reduction, which is a 0.71% reduction in the debt service. Combining those, which usually make up the town budget, when you look at operating capital and debt, as we've heard, the increase is a 2.17% increase. We've heard from education. Education's operating budget request is $62,445,900. That is a $917,441 increase, which equals 1.49%. With all of those budgets being added together, the total requested budget for the town and the Board of Education is $105,269,759, which is a 1.77% increase. Revenue, I'm not going to go through revenue because honestly, Mr. Hoey did a fine job going through the revenues, but I will point out that out of the amount that we would need to bring in on revenues, the request on the raising of taxes, or the raising from taxes, would be $99,124,909. That's 94.2% of the requested revenue, or the required revenue. $6,144,850 is non-tax revenue. And those were all described to us in the presentation. That would equal, well, I already told you what it equals, but with the grand list going up 1.42%, the prior year, or the current year mill rate that we're in, is 32.31. The proposed mill rate with all of the numbers we have just talked about tonight is 32.67, which would equal an increase of 1.11%. That is mill rate increase, which also equals tax increase. Bonding was explained pretty well on the Board of Education side with the $6,259,773 request. Again, I will not go through the projects. We'll have plenty of time to go through those and ask questions on Thursday, but they were summarized very well by Dr. Freeman and the town. I don't have that number, but we heard it was in the 5 million range, and I apologize, I don't have the number, but we're going to be getting that over the next day to also talk about on Thursday. That is a recap to, as I said, set the stage for Thursday's budget workshop. Before we go into, well, before I have my final words, which will just summarize the meeting tonight, I will go to our second agenda line item finally, and that is public forum. Does anybody wish to address the Board of Finance in public forum? Again, we would ask name, address, and trying to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. I do see a hand, and it is Valerie Ferrucci. I'm going to lower your hand and ask you to unmute and ask away.
Hello, my name is Valerie Ferrucci. I'm at Little Meadow Road. First off, I'd like to thank all the board members and committee members for all of the time spent on this process and making a forum available to the public. I'd like to speak in full support of the proposed education budget. I believe that Dr. Freeman has presented a budget that represents the financial crisis that we are in, while still maintaining a high level of standards that we're accustomed to in our town. I do believe that all the investments are worthwhile. While I fully comprehend the financial challenges we are in, I encourage you to please not cut the education budget. I'm concerned that with the frugality of the current budget, the losses our students would receive if it were cut further would be far too great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Valerie. Appreciate your comments. I see another hand. That is Elizabeth Wilson. I will lower your hand and you can unmute yourself and name, address, and comments.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wilson at 27 Hazel Road. Enrollment in Guilford Public Schools has declined 9.4% since the 2014-2015 school year, which is when construction began on the new high school. And we're forecasted to have an additional decline of 3.6% in the upcoming year. This means that school enrollment will have declined 12.7%, or 431 fewer students in 7 years. We've experienced a decline every year for these past 7 years. During this same time period, the cost per student has increased 27.5%. That is more than 2.5 times the rate of inflation. We have gone from $16,508 per student 6 years ago to the requested $21,040. Demographics in the state of Connecticut have been changing as our population becomes older. Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging estimates that 30% of Guilford's population will be age 65 or older in 4 years. The shoreline and Litchfield County are experiencing this aging faster than any other areas in the state. But this is not a Guilford-only phenomenon. This is a statewide situation, and there is currently no expected reversal of this trend. Let's not forget, we are in the middle of a pandemic and the worst economic crisis in 90 years. Last Tuesday, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testified before the Senate Banking Committee and said that the economy remains hobbled. The economic recovery remains uneven and far from complete, and the path ahead is highly uncertain. I believe we should take the 2014-15 level of spending per student, the $16,508, multiply it by the inflation rate, which was 10.15%, and multiply it by the expected school enrollment of 2,968 students for a total Board of Education budget of $54,630,000, which is a $7.8 million decrease from the proposed budget. This will mean an approximate 7% reduction in taxes for every Guilford taxpayer. I am very appreciative of all the hard work that everybody dedicates to our town, and I thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate your comments. Anybody else wishing to address the Board of Finance? And I will say going once, going twice, closed. Thank you, everyone. Before we adjourn, you've probably been hearing this over and over again, but I'll say it anyway as a reminder that the budget workshop number 1 will be held virtually on Thursday night, March 4th at 7:30 p.m. by Zoom. I know the links are already posted. Public forum is on the agenda before and after the board's workshop proceedings and a possible vote on moving the budget forward to voters. I would add also that should the Board of Finance, for any reason, decide not to vote a budget forward to referendum on Thursday night, which could be due to any circumstances. One time it was a snowstorm. I don't see a snowstorm in the future, but I could tell you that was one of them. A second virtual workshop is in fact scheduled already, if needed, on Monday night, March 8th at 7:30 p.m. And that is also, I believe, scheduled with links. If we make a decision on Thursday night, the 4th, then we will cancel the second workshop. With that, I do not have anything further. I appreciate everybody's involvement in this. I don't have to say it to the elected officials and everyone who's worked on these budgets, but to the public, very much appreciate your participation in this. We always strive to try to get community members educated on our budgets. And, you know, sometimes it takes a virtual meeting, I guess, to do that, as opposed to in person. It makes it a little bit easier for everybody. So it was very gratifying, at least for me personally. And I'm sure the rest of the boards that are represented here, to see the number of people that we had on tonight. So I very much thank all of you for attending and watching, possibly on GCTV or on YouTube. So with that, we will see you all on Thursday evening. And I will at this point entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, all.
Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Hey, Mike, good job.